All right. Well, thank you everybody for hopping on with us today. For those of you that I haven't met before, my name is Jesse Hill. I'm the president of Tier 3 IT Solutions, and I'm joined by Aaron Pobrin. Do you want to introduce yourself really quick there, Aaron?
Hey everybody, yeah, my name's Aaron, and I've been with Tier 3 for nearly 4 years. Started off as a triage tech, worked my way into the support desk team lead, and recently transitioned into a cybersecurity role.
Yes, and thank you, Aaron, for joining us today. Um, we're going to be walking through, this idea of, really about making sure that your business is adapting and evolving to the ever-changing cybersecurity landscape. So before we jump into all the content and the agenda, I just want to also point out we do appreciate having an interactive engagement. So if you have any questions or comments, I think you should be able to throw them in the chat and the Q&A. I know sometimes permissions need to be updated, but please feel free to put them in there. You can see the agenda here. I'm assuming that everybody has a bit of an idea of what we're going to talk about. But really, what we want to impress upon everybody is that cybersecurity is becoming a much more critical aspect in your business's continuity, longevity, ability to continue to operate and deliver services and value to your clients and your team and everybody that's involved with it. And it's changing faster than ever. There are new threats, new risks, new vulnerabilities, new tools, new processes, new things that we need to always be thinking about to make sure that we are staying ahead of these risks and these threats. And I know that it can be a lot and it can be overwhelming to think about. Um, what I often, kind of share with our clients and people that I talk to on this is that you don't have to do everything, but you have to do more than your neighbor, more than your peers. Um, the reality is, unfortunately, that the cyber threats, the cyber risks that we have on the screen here, they are um, primarily executed and run by criminal organizations, and they follow the path of least resistance. Meaning, if your business, has the quote unquote the unlocked door, the security weaknesses, then you are more at risk than your peers. So we don't want to go into necessarily detail of all of these things, but as Aaron mentioned, he's spent a good amount of time, working in different aspects of, the IT industry, frontline, support, cybersecurity, all those types of things. So Aaron, I was hoping that we could have a bit of a chat here, just around some of these threats. What have you seen? What do end users and businesses maybe struggle with when it comes to understanding and appreciating, the threats that are out there today?
So what we are kind of seeing a little bit more often, which is unfortunate, is the data breaches. When we are working with different vendors, we're trusting them and providing our data to them, assuming that they're going to keep our information behind locked doors and treat it well. The reality is that unfortunately we're only trusting our information with them, and they may not have the best security or the best defenses, and some of that information gets leaked, whether that's password or personal identifiable information. Um, Now, depending on the level of information that's taken from those breaches, they could be used for a variety of things, coordinated spear phishing attacks, because now they have addresses, they have names, they have emails, and just makes a lot more compelling emails or, phishing attempts to try to get people to, click a link and submit information. Then we also have like supply chain attacks. with just kind of on the whole data breaches. You know, you could have the best security in the world, but if a vendor that you're working with gets compromised, then, unfortunately, there's not a lot of control with what happens with that data. Um, when we're looking at social engineering and deepfakes, now it seems like the not too distant future where somebody can model someone's complete voice or video. But as the AI models are getting better and more of our information and more of what we share is online, it's not going to take a lot of our video and our voice to create some really compelling and lifelike versions of ourselves that can emulate a colleague, a loved one, or even yourself.
And I think what I've seen is that the most, I'll say, successful attacks, from the criminal's perspective, is when they are layering these vulnerabilities on top of each other. So I'll give an example. I took a phone call from a local business uh, the Friday before Thanksgiving, and unfortunately, they found themselves compromised with ransomware. And they didn't have a backup, and they were wondering what they should do. And I mean, unfortunately, it was a really tough position. We tried to help them out, but they weren't a client. We didn't have access. We didn't have backups. There wasn't a whole lot we could do. We gave them some recommendations, and unfortunately, they did decide to pay the ransom. When I connected with him afterwards to find out, what happened, he basically says, "Oh, well, one of their staff fell for a phishing email. On that staff member's computer, they had a plain text file that had all of their passwords in it. The attackers used those passwords to basically work through the firewall and to gain administrative access to deploy this software." And this is an example of where the criminals, the bad guys, they only had to be right once to find multiple risk factors that they could use, to get into that business. And the thing about this, an incident like that is that it is going to affect their business in multiple ways. Now, they ended up having a direct cost. They paid a 5, 10, $20,000 ransom, whatever that cost was. But when I spoke to him on the Friday of that long weekend, I basically asked him. I said, "Hey, you don't have a backup. What are the chances you could um, not pay the ransom and just recreate your information that you need, off of things you have in your emails or other sources?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's basically impossible." They had something like 40,000 inventory items. They had 800 clients on their accounts receivable who owed the money. They had all kinds of different challenges that they would face. And so the business impact would be significant. Again, I do not recommend paying the ransom. We want to avoid that at all costs. They made that decision on their own, and they did recover their operations. They happened to find a criminal organization that lived up to their commitments. But anyways, Aaron, do you have any thoughts or inputs on some of the other business impacts from an incident, from the previous slide there?
Yes, especially when we're looking at data loss, when the ransomware takes over a network, obviously there weren't the proper safeguards in place. So like you mentioned, we're trusting them to hold on their side of the bargain, that they're giving us the keys to unlock our information and we continue as on. But they're not quite sure, or a company might be sure of what actually happened with their data, right? Was that cloned and was that stored? And then,
Yeah.
we're looking at things like reputational damage. anytime that there's a breach, and especially a breach is one thing, but when all this sensitive information, potentially gets leaked out, and then you also find out that there weren't like safeguards in place where there was hashing and salting of the passwords. So when passwords get leaked and credit card information, um, there's the whole recovery effort, to get the business up and running. But then now there's the PR effort, to work with the community and work with your customers to ensure them that it's okay to do business with us again.
Yeah, well, and there's more pressure to kind of publicize um, cyber incidents, and we have seen, in our client base, maybe a machine shop seems like a relatively low risk business, but if their customer is one of the big, oil sands producers, as an example, um, their contract with that oil sands producer may require that they are maintaining a certain level of cybersecurity, protections and maturity and configurations and those types of things. And so the reputational damage, sometimes means that you may or may not be able to do business with a particular type of customer that you want. They may ask you to disclose, if you have experienced a cyber incident, what the circumstances were, what the outcomes were, and they're actually starting to consider that in their selection process. So the challenge with cybersecurity is that nobody is cyber secure. Nobody will be cyber secure. When you see the news and you realize, big airlines, have cyber incidents. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, we've had two pretty big, we'll say, interruptions at Amazon AWS and Microsoft Azure. And then I just gave a story of a local business who was facing catastrophe. That story will never make the news because it doesn't impact the entire country. So I think the point that we want to make around really how to prepare your business is it's not about the tools. And maybe I'll phrase it this way because I loved this. I picked it up at a conference a couple years ago. Is that cybersecurity is not a product you install, it's a practice you instill. And what that means is that if it's a practice, it means it's something that you design, you implement, you test, you review, you go back to step number one. And so, again, it's not about what products you use, but it's about making sure that you and your team are consistently and continuously educating yourself about risk, learning about, the remediation or the protections that are available to you, making decisions about them, and continuing the discussions around that side of things. Um, Aaron, do you have anything else that you'd want to add on the thoughts on this one here?
Yeah, the big one is the one at the top there when we're looking at zero trust by default, which is essentially security framework for protecting everything where um, essentially the default response is that everybody has to prove their level of trust when accessing any sort of information. Now, normally we're kind of thinking, outside looking in when people want to access internal resources, but this practice is even done internally. Just because your computer on your internal network reaching out, to a server, each time this zero trust framework is you have to prove your level of identity and level of trust before accessing those resources.
You know what? And I think that's a really good point. And one I meant to hit on a previous slide there was that um, cyber threats come from inside your business too. So think about this. If you have a disgruntled employee who quits and decides to delete a whole bunch of data, or you have an employee who maybe is a little morally loose and decides to copy a bunch of your data or to send a bunch of your data to themselves. These are also cyber threats and cyber risks that you need to face. And so zero trust is really about making sure that your first thought is about how do you protect the business, how do you limit access, how do you kind of put controls in place that minimize the risk of those threats. Which, I mean, brings us right here, right? Is that when we're talking about how do you design these protections? How do you develop this practice? The first thing is understanding your risk, thinking about it, not just from, the technical side, but the people and the interactions and, policies that you've put in place. An example that I give all the time is most businesses, if you gave people access to a vehicle, there'd be clear rules and restrictions about what they can do in that vehicle. But a lot of times they're given a computer and they can do whatever they want. They can install software, they can change settings, they can use it for personal stuff, they can do all kinds of different things. And so as leadership, we need to be thinking about, again, not just what tools we're putting in place, but how we are engaging and interacting with our teams so that their awareness level is continuously improving. And the reason it's part of this, conversation around being future ready and evolving is that most of our businesses and the clients that we work with, they cannot function without technology. And so when you think about where your business is going and what you want to achieve, chances are it depends heavily on having technology that is working and supporting you in moving in that direction. Aaron, anything that you want to add on this one here?
Yeah, a big one is the response and recovery. Obviously, no business ever wants to go through, a ransomware or anything like that. But having an exact or having a plan and an incident response plan and a recovery plan allows that when you're in the thick of things, it allows for a lot of cloudy judgments and, mistakes to be had. But when you have that kind of document or helicopter view of who does what, whose role is a part of that situation, it allows those, potentially scary situations to have that guidance and calm to get you to where you need to go. Kind of that game plan instead of scrambling in the situation. Very key, important thing to have.
The example I always use, and it's actually so funny and timely, is running fire drills at schools. I this morning got an email from my child's school saying, "Hey, we wanted to let you know the fire alarm went off at 8:46 a.m. All the students had to exit the building. The fire department showed up. Everything's fine." Now, when you think about it, you go back over all of the years that they've been in school, they've had scheduled, fire drills where they've probably educated the students, told them what's going to happen, what it's going to sound like, where they should go, because they know that if the students have practiced it, they will respond in a much more predictable and safe way when there's actually smoke in the hallways. If the very first time they ever hear a fire alarm go off, there's smoke coming down the hallway, people panic, they get lost, they get hurt. And it's the same thing in cybersecurity and incident response. A lot of businesses that I talk to, they've never really recognized or thought about what would be the impact of a cyber incident on our business. What's the role that our lawyers play, our insurance providers, public relations? How do we assure our clients that we're working on it, that it's going to be okay. How do we maintain cash flow? All of these different things. It is not a technology problem, it's a business problem. So if you've never done an incident response simulation, it's one of the things I think is really important for everybody to do. And feel free to reach out. We've got a couple of fun little resources for that. Now, if you're on here and you're trying to think about how can you take your technology, your cybersecurity posture, move it forward, these are some of the things that we recommend for everybody. Now, you'll notice on here, again, we haven't listed, certain tools or platforms or security things. It's very much about maturing your understanding of the role that technology is playing in your business, the risks that are inherent in using technology in your business and the impacts on your business, and then working with your team to design plans to either accept the risk, eliminate the risk, mitigate the risk, or shift that risk to someone else through things like insurance and those types of things. Aaron, maybe going back to some of your experiences you've had, dealing with, supporting people, challenges they've run into. Do you see any of these as being common gaps, in small, medium businesses?
Training is a big one. There's different varieties of things to detect and look out for. And it's kind of what you're mentioning in this presentation here, where it's ever evolving. So when we're looking at, for training with, video training about learning about new and upcoming technologies, or, phishing training and simulations to get in the habit of identifying, links in an email, improper senders, things to kind of pop out uh, that are, maybe obvious and not so obvious, to kind of do that double take to prevent those things to happen. And then also is just fostering that ability of, not trying to curtail or hide when something does happen, being open and honest and sharing when, you click on something you shouldn't, or you see something out of line, and having that, not being ashamed that you did it, but reporting it and working through and finding out how we can mitigate it immediately. Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, yeah, and that last one is a good point. Often you'll hear it called like zero fault reporting, and it's exactly that. We need to encourage a culture of communication and openness so that if somebody, you know, has a momentary lapse and they feel like maybe they've, done something they shouldn't have, that they feel okay putting their hand up, letting management know, letting IT know, so that it can be investigated. Now, I do want to just remind everybody, if you have any questions, hopefully the chat and the Q&A are working. I haven't seen anything specific around the questions. So, Aaron, let's maybe just kind of use these as talking points. For the first one here, how do I know if my business is secure? How would you answer that question?
I mean, that's a tricky one because you'll never know. There's always something. You always have to iterate and always kind of try to be one step ahead of what's out there, because what worked yesterday, will not work today. So it's always that, um, taking the baseline of what you have, reviewing what's out there, and staying on top and fixing and patching any of those vulnerabilities to stay current.
I think that it's one of the things we go back to is that we internally have kind of shifted our mindset from trying to be cyber secure to being cyber resilient. And what that means is that, yes, we still want to, improve, security over time and manage that practice. But cyber incidents, cyber risks, cyber threats will continue to evolve, and there is a possibility that your business will be impacted in some way. So a cyber resilient business has thought about that, has planned some response and remediation tactics. And the businesses that are cyber resilient tend to actually suffer fewer cyber incidents. When they do experience an incident, the impact is lower and the recovery is faster. So again, obviously lots of thoughts to share on that one. Let's go to the second one here. Security tools. Do you have any, without naming vendors, what are your thoughts on this question?
So with this, you want to practice layered security or defense in depth. It's not just enough to have endpoint protection or, antivirus software on a computer, because then you need something to look at the network when we're looking at a firewall or a VPN to protect the network as well. You could look at something like intrusion detection or prevention systems, which is monitoring and thwarting malicious traffic before they even hit. Um, Patch management to protect, software operating systems against common vulnerabilities and exposures, or CVEs. And then even if you want to get granular, we can go with application control. Just because the software is running on the computer, how are we trusting that everything that it's, accessing and resourcing is what it should? So if you want to gatekeep the level of access a program has, because maybe we don't necessarily trust the vendor or they don't need that level of access, you know, getting quite granular with the level of control that it needs.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is we we use a lot of frameworks and guidelines and those types of things. So the CIS controls is a list of 18 categories of cybersecurity controls with 153 different possible recommendations based on different levels of maturity in your cybersecurity practice. So as Aaron said, it's about layering them. It's about making sure that you have plan A, plan B, and maybe a plan C. Um, and so, really what you need to do is you need to understand your risk, understand your options, and design a plan that makes sense for you, your business, your budget, your expectations. I am cognizant of the time as well. So we're coming up to the bottom of the hour. Let's talk really quick about how AI is affecting cybersecurity. And then we'll just, again, call out if anybody has any questions, and we'd like to answer those as well.
It's the flavor of the year, really, with, Copilot and Chat GPT, and how we're going from model to model, and access is just exploding like crazy. What is kind of lagging behind is the ramifications and the implications of a few things. What information are people sharing on there? What guarantee or what level of access is this data being potentially trained on or utilized? When you're submitting documents and uploading documents, especially if you're integrating something like a Copilot, is that information, is all the information accessible to the employees? Do you still have those security frameworks where you're limiting who can access what? And then the other thing with how AI is affecting security posture, based on or calling back those previous slides, crafting malware, looking for vulnerabilities. These platforms are getting really good and can do this much faster than the human can, and it can work 24/7. So those kind of threats can potentially come down the pipeline a lot sooner than than we would like.
Well, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier with the deep fakes and that side of things. And what came to mind was, I'm sure a lot of you have used, FaceTime. and on FaceTime, you're having a video chat with, a friend or a family member, and you can go and you can choose, a character to, take over, and you can all become little panda bears, right? I mean, this is kind of a really rudimentary early, AI um, video manipulation type of service. And you can go on, you can find all kinds of examples of people doing lifelike kind of transformations to take over their face and make it look like someone else, their voice, make it sound like someone else. So, there's a lot of opportunity in AI, for businesses, for productivity, and all the great things that we can get from it. But it is also going to create more risk for us as security conscious folks. All right. So this is everything that we had that we wanted to chat about today. Again, we appreciate everybody hopping on. If you want to scan the QR code to get in touch with us, that'd be fantastic. Again, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those. We appreciate you hopping on, and hope you all have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.